Hello YouTube, welcome to my video where I'm going to rank the classes of Ashes of Creation for PvP. And you might be asking, all 64 classes on a PvP tier list? That's going to take forever. Well, I'm only going to do the base 8 classes, and part of the reason for that is that you can always respec your secondary. And if you don't know how Ashes of Creation's class system works, when you make your character, you pick one of the base 8 classes, and then after that, at level 25, I think it is right now, that's the planned level that you get to select your secondary class. So say you start as a fighter, and level 25 you pick ranger. That means you become a hunter. Let's say hunter's really strong and you play that class for a really long time, but it gets mega nerfed. You can just switch to something else. So that's why I'm going to rank the base 8 classes. Is this going to be an accurate tier list? No, absolutely not. I'm doing this before the game even comes out, before it's even in Alpha 2. Things will change, but I think I have some insight that, it'll be fun to look back at this list and see how close I am, but I think I have some insight because this game is largely based on Arcage, especially the combat and the classes. The combat is most similar, at least the systems are most similar to Guild Wars 2, but a lot of the abilities, you can recognize them from Arcage. Good bit of them, at least. There's going to be some unique stuff too, but I think the same principles that I've learned in Arcage and other MMOs, you can apply to this game too. I mean, they all have decently similar combat. So let's just get started on it. I'm going to start with Bard. And if you don't know, I'm going to have 2 tier lists here. One for solo / small group that I'm weighting a lot more towards solo. And this is all world v world PvP. If they have like instanced arenas, that's something different. This is going to be for world PvP. So solo and small group list, and like a Zerg / large group list. So let's start with Bard. I think Bard is going to be the weakest for solo and small group, but I am going to put it in C. And you're definitely going to want to pick one of the damage dealing secondaries, whether that's Summoner, Mage, Ranger, Rogue, or Fighter. Tank, Cleric, and Bard surely are just not going to be good, in solo especially. Because you're just not going to be able to kill anybody. If you're tanky and have a lot of support, that's definitely not strong in solo. So just baseline, Bard has like the weakest stat as their main stat that you can get for solo, and that's support. I'd say the only reason I'm not even putting it in D is I don't think a lot of people are going to be building their characters for solo or small group in this game. So if for some reason you're picking a Bard and you build your character to be as strong as possible in solo, you'll probably still be able to beat a decent bit of these classes just because they're building for like a Zerg or large group scenario. So yeah, I'll put that in C. In Zerg or large group, it's S tier. Basically how Bard was balanced in Arcage is, let's say you're a group of 4 people. You wouldn't really want a Bard because just an additional player that didn't support everybody would be stronger than the Bard. In this game, that might not be true because one of their classes might be a very like singularly focused support class where, like, let's say you take a healer, a damage dealer, and a Bard, but this Bard like really buffs up one player, so they could really buff up the healer if the group needed more healing, or they could really buff up the DPS, and he would basically be equivalent to like another DPS because he buffs the DPS of, like, say it's like Fighter, Bard, or Cleric. He can buff the Fighter up so much that he's basically equivalent to another DPS, or if he buffs the healer, he's equivalent to another healer. That could be a possibility, but something tells me it's going to lean more towards the way that Arcage had it, where like if you had a group of 4, you wouldn't want a Bard. If you had a group of 5, whether you had a Bard or another class might be pretty even And then basically 6 people or beyond, you'd always want a bard. Like the support that a bard could provide was just way too valuable, and it's definitely going to be that way in this game. And I'll bet there's going to be multiple builds that will be very strong. There will probably be a build that like spams just large AoE buffs. One that could spam like protective qualities on people to save their lives. Yeah, I'm gonna guess. It's not even a guess. Bard will be S tier in Zerg gameplay. All right, moving on. Which one do I want to do now? I want to do tank. So I think tank's gonna be B, potentially A, but I'm gonna go with B in solo and small group. You're getting like high tankiness as a base stat on your tank, and Ashes of Creation is every class is very malleable based on like what gear you use, what talents you pick, what your secondary is. So a tank, if you pick a DPS secondary like Knight, you'll probably be really strong against other melees because they're going to be trying to, kill you while you're super tanky, and you can retaliate on them. So you'll have some good matchups, but overall, self-tankiness is not the most valuable stat for solo or small group. You want damage and healing, I think, because I think healing is basically equivalent to tankiness in solo. As long as you don't get one shot, as soon as you start healing yourself, your HP value over the course of a fight is going to be higher than like a tanky class. Tankiness is really multiplied once it's also being healed. So in large groups, your tanky class can run in, start taking damage, and get healed, and that's really valuable to have a tanky class be able to run into a large group. So yeah, I'm going to put tank in C. In large group, I'm going to put tank in S. And I think a lot of people are speculating whether tanks will be useful in PvP in this game overall. And their question isn't about solo and small group, I don't think. I think it's about large group. Well, if you've played Arcage, which this game is largely inspired by, Stephen Shreve played a lot of Arcage. And if you've played Arcage and you look at this game, you can see just so many similarities. And in Arcage, tanks in large groups were just, if you had one in your group, it made a world of difference. Basically, in that game, it was also a very malleable game where you could make many different kinds of builds. Other classes could take the utility that a tank could take, but if you, like say you're a mage and you blink into a Zerg, even though maybe you have a lot of the utility that a tank could have, you're just going to die. So preferably what you want is a tank that can run in, and if the enemy targets you, they're just making a big mistake, but you have all this really awesome utility. You can AoE fear people, you can pull a bunch of people in and then stun them, which sets up like your AoE DPS to just blow up a group of people. There's so many things that you could do in Arcage when you're a tank. You just run at the enemy and they don't want to be near you because they know what's going to happen. They know you're going to disrupt them or CC them or set you up to die, which is just such an incredibly powerful role to have in your group. So next we're going to go Cleric, which in solo and small group I'm going to put in S tier. It's hard to get away from this, although Ashes might design their game a little bit differently. In Arcage, Healer was incredibly strong in solo and small group. It did actual good damage. I only played Arcage Unchained for a while, but even in like the original Arcage, you could take the healing tree as well as some damage, and it was the strongest solo build in the game. You could solo healers with one big burst combo, one large CC chain. If a DPS tried to kill you, you would just heal through their damage and then do the same to them. It was so incredibly strong, and it was really fun. And even in games like World of Warcraft, healers are very tanky because they can just heal themselves. And how MMOs are balanced is one DPS really shouldn't be able to kill a healer, but if that DPS doesn't have any self-healing, the healer will definitely kill them. And heck, there's some healers in games like World of Warcraft and Archmage that deal a lot of damage on top of having a lot of healing, which is such a scary combo in solo. So if you go Cleric base, you take one of these DPS off specs: Templar, Shadow Disciple, Protector, Oracle, Shaman. They're maybe even like High Priest, because Cleric has some damage abilities. But likely one of the DPS off specs will be the strongest for solo and small group. And it's scary. Cleric might be the strongest solo/small group class in the game. Just think about it. If you had a strong solo build, even once you get into group fights, you can heal those people, which is also incredibly strong. So whether you're solo or in a small group, Cleric, S tier. Large group, you're the only base healer in the game. So you're just definitely S. Your group's gonna need healing. I'm sure there'll be like some large AoE healing specs, some spot healing specs, multiple different specs that will be S tier here. So that's just pretty self-explanatory. These three roles are just incredibly needed in a Zerg. Okay, next I'm gonna go with Mage. Mage is gonna be A tier for solo and small group. And the reason for that is that range doesn't really have its power like it does in a large group. Whereas melee is weaker in large groups and stronger in small groups, because you can just run in and you're not going to take the fire of a large Zerg. You're just going to be hitting one person. So range loses its advantage in solo and small group, but gains its advantage in Zerg. Melee and range play very different roles in Zerg gameplay usually, but in solo and small group they pretty much play the same role, except melee just has an easier time. Like you can just run at the ranged and they lose some of their advantage. And then also cast times are not as strong. They're easier to interrupt, and by the time you get a cast off, sometimes you've already gotten your health chunked quite a ways down. So, but Mage still has huge potential. It's a DPS class, and damage is an extremely valuable stat no matter what you're doing in the game. And maybe one of these has really good CC and you can just set up one-shots. Maybe the Warlock class with a pet is really strong. Probably any class, once you take Summoner, could be really strong, because pets are always really strong in solo and small group. So yeah, I'm putting Mage in A. For Zerg, I'm putting Mage in S. And I think this is going to be the only DPS I keep in S. It just has the most potential to be the strongest AoE class in the game. And AoE is so strong. Like, if a tank goes in and sets up your mages, let's say mages are the strongest AoE builds in the game, just have like a group of 4 or 5 mages that once the tank sets them up, they just blow the whole group up that the tank pulled in. And that's the easiest way to decide a Zerg fight, and probably what will happen most of the time that will decide a Zerg fight. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Who knows what build it'll be? Maybe it's Archwizard, maybe it's Shadowcaster. Who knows? But I think it's going to be Mage. There's always a chance there's other builds that are good or supplemental or even the best, but Mage just has the highest chance in my eyes. So next we're going to do Fighter. I'm going to put it right above the Mage for solo and small group, with some good potential for being S tier, because I think Fighter synergizes with Cleric off spec the best. We get High Sword here. You're going to be weak to getting kited, because Steven himself said that Rangers have the second highest mobility in the game and Rogues have the highest. So if you're behind Rangers as a melee, they're just going to kite you. Well, if you take Cleric off spec, you can like hide behind a tree and heal yourself, and then the Ranger's going to have to like run back to you, and then you leap at him, and then he runs again, and you just run behind a tree and heal yourself again, and you just repeat that over and over. So it really helps you with the advantage that a ranged class will have against you if they're going to try to kite you. And it's not like you won't have mobility, so you can take your opportunities once you get on the Ranger to deal high amount of damage and then just heal yourself back up. And I think it just synergizes the best with Fighter as compared to like Rogue. I think Rogue's going to be more geared towards taking just lots of damage because you can stealth up on people. But not to say that they won't have a strong Cleric off spec too. Like it probably will be strong, but I just think it synergizes better with Fighter. So I think High Sword has a good potential to come up here. But there's some other potentials for Fighter too, like maybe Shadow Blade has some stealth like Rogue, and it has like a good one-shot build. But I think Rogue just has a better chance of that, a lot more specs to do that off of. Something like Hunter could be good. It could have like a good mix of range and melee, just enough mix that, you know, if you are getting kited by a ranger, you can still damage them and then leap on them and do more damage. So and then maybe, you know, Summoner one always has good potential. Blade Caller, maybe you like send your blades from ranged, you know, you have some ranged like the Hunter. So yeah, I think Fighter has good potential in solo and small group, but I'm just gonna keep it at A right now, I think. And then in large group, I'm gonna put it in A. I think there's most of these builds are probably gonna play the same role as something else. Like Spell Sword, I would suspect has better AoE. Like if you have like a whirlwind ability, you add fire to it, which makes your whirlwind ability do more damage. And you know, it could be as good as Mage, but it's just one spec where you're competing against a lot of Mage specs for an AoE slot. Or maybe you're trying to be a stealther. Rogue has a lot more potential in that area. So it's not to say that builds like these won't be good, or like Weapon Master, you know, just a strong melee build. It's not to say they won't be good, I just think they have less of a chance of being as good as other things. But the one thing I think Fighter might have going for it is Dreadnought. You're a fighter base, so you probably still do really good damage, but if you have like a specifically spec'd single target healer on you, you might just be nearly unkillable and still do a lot of damage. So like the two of you, just a healer and just a Dreadnought, might really be able to just grind through the enemy Zerg one by one pretty quickly, but still like be nigh unkillable, and that would be a pretty cool combo in my opinion. So Fighter has some good potential, probably the top of A, but we'll see. Okay, on to, I think we're gonna do Ranger. I'm gonna put Ranger at the top of A for solo and small group. This is also one like Fighter that could potentially be S. I think Ranger is going to be just pure damage and pure mobility. Pretty much no matter which spec you go, that's kind of how you're going to want to play. I think you probably synergize a lot less with having some like off healing from like Soulbow. Having a pet is obviously always going to be really strong, but you're still going to be playing pretty much the same play style as if you didn't have a pet. Just kite and do damage. So that could be really strong. If you have the second highest mobility in the game, you can kite a lot of the melees. You can potentially do so much damage to a cleric that you just kill them if you just go pure damage. So lots of potential for Ranger in solo and small group. In large group, I'm going to put a Ranger above Fighter, I think, actually. Just having something that can constantly do damage from ranged and has a really high mobility, so you can always dip back into your own Zerg to protect yourself from like melee that are on you, is just really strong. Like in a Zerg fight, I wouldn't doubt that Ranger is going to be the class that just has the highest damage overall. Like kills are really important in a Zerg gameplay, where like a mage might blink in and do a bunch of AoE damage and kill 5 players, but over the course of a large Zerg fight, Ranger might do the most damage, but they might not have as many kills because it just gets healed through. So it just depends. But you know, if your Zerg or their Zerg is really good at preventing the tanks and mages from comboing, then maybe the Zerg fight is decided by these Rangers, you know, peppering or bursting down single targets from range and just constantly doing damage and ooming the other Zerg. So there's a lot of, and like I said, range damage is very valuable in Zerg, where melee is sort of diminished, especially if you're very squishy. So moving on to Rogue. If I were a betting man, I would put Rogue below Cleric, but I'm still going to put it in S tier. 1, you're melee. 2, you stealth. and you can just try to go pure damage and burst people down, which just has a lot of potential. You have the highest mobility in the game, so nothing can kite you. Because you have the highest mobility in the game, you can still kite things like tanks and fighters. In a lot of MMOs, these stealth classes do really well against other melees. It's not that they fight them face to face; they like dot them up and run, or reset and stealth again after doing an opener on them. There's just a lot of ways that you can outplay the other melees, and then the range just can't kite you. And if you go pure damage, you might just be able to a healer or burst them down before they can react. So lots of potential for Rogue. And I think it's going to be pretty similar, your role is, in Zerg gameplay. You get in their backline, stealthed up, you try to one-shot things. There's always potential for other types, like maybe the Rogue Bard, the Charlatan, has like AoE stealth, which would make it just like an absolute necessity. Like, if there's certain kinds of utility that are extremely needed in Zerg gameplay, and they come from one of these 64 classes, like that one's just auto S tier, like you need it in your raid. But I think there's a difference between an S tier class and something that you bring because it's necessary. Like say Charlatan does have AoE stealth, you probably only want to take like 2 or 3 of them, but you don't take a whole bunch of them. Whereas like an S tier class, like a tank or a mage, you're going to take a lot of them because they're just always useful. But you can't really overlap the utility of AoE stealth. So yeah, I think Rogue's still going to be A tier. I think Fighter has a little more potential than Rogue, but it's not to say that stealthing and one-shotting healers or bards is not useful. It's still very useful, so still A. And the last class, Summoner. Summoner is the one class that I want. I mean, I think it definitely will be strong in solo and small group, but I want it to be better than Cleric. Honestly, I want Cleric to be A tier. I don't want Healer to be super strong in solo and small group, but it's hard to ignore that it has that potential, a very high potential to be there. I think it's probably going to be above Rogue. But I think the one class that could be stronger is Cleric. And I don't know where I heard this, but I heard somebody saying, like, if you go Necromancer, which is Summoner, Cleric, you can have a healer pet, but you don't have to. So you could summon, like, all DPS pets. So let's say you're fighting a Cleric and you want to overwhelm them with damage. You just summon all DPS pets and just take him out before he can even like retaliate and kill you. Or maybe one healer pet is enough to heal through his damage. So you have one healer pet and 2 DPS or something like that. You heal through the damage he does to you, and you just overwhelm him and kill him with a bunch of pets. And beyond that, we've already kind of discussed how a class like High Sword from Fighter, or even a class like Mage with Acolyte could potentially be really strong to heal yourself. But these classes that are like jacks of all trades, and Clerics do this too, they do high damage, they heal themselves. Jack of all trade classes are really strong in solo and small group. And I already discussed how these Summoner off specs also have a lot of potential because pets are really strong. Well, on Summoner, you could go a jack of all trade Summoner, like that has pets. So you just have the answer to like every situation you're in solo and small group. No matter what you're fighting, you have a playstyle you can fall back on to beat them. You could kite tanks and fighters. You can heal and disrupt against rogues. You can LOS rangers or a mage. You just kind of have an answer for everything. So you're very flexible. The only thing you might not have an answer for is a Cleric healing himself and then killing you. But I hope that's not the case. I hope Summoner is just the king of solo and small group. Yeah, that's my hope. And I think there's a good chance of it. I mean, I think it's definitely S tier, but I hope it's the strongest. And then in large group, I'm actually gonna put Summoner at the bottom of A. I'm tempted to put it in B, but I'm gonna put it at the bottom of A. Steven has explained this multiple times, that Summoner is a role filler. So all of these builds will probably play one of the roles that the others play. And I think there's just a good chance that, at least one of them is supplemental or as good as the other classes. Like maybe Summoner, Tank, Brood Warden, maybe you have a pet that can run in and do the kind of utility that a tank can. Like maybe the pet like sucks people in and stuns them and sets up the mages. Or if you go Shadowmancer, you're like you stealth with a bunch of pets and try to one-shot people. There's just a lot of potential here. Maybe the Mage one, Spellmancer, maybe you have a lot of AoE debuffs that you put on the enemy, so you could put yourself in the Mage group and blink in with them and try to do a bunch of AoE, and your AoE makes the mages do more damage. There's just a lot of potential for it to have a role or multiple roles in Zerg, but I think it being a role filler means that just by default it has less of a chance for its role to be as strong. So, for example, if you're trying to be a stealth one-shotter, the chances that the Summoner Shadowmancer is as strong are low. Let's say you want to be an AoE class. The chances that your one spec is as strong as a mage are just lower. Or you want to be a healer. Necromancer has a healing pet. You know, the chances you're as good as clerics are just lower. But there's 8 specs, so the chances that 1 or 2 of them or 3 of them or something are useful or as good as their counterpart is pretty high once you go across the whole spectrum. So yeah, I think it's A, maybe B, but you know, maybe if your group's not super large where you need to fill roles, then having a summoner around would be really nice. Like maybe you need somebody that can assassinate and you don't have a rogue in your group, or you need an extra like tank to go in and have tank utility. So Brood Warden can do that. Lots of flexibility here, but you can't really respec in this game, so you kind of choose your role. That's the unfortunate part for Summoner. You can't just be like, hey guys, I'm going to go back to town and respec and fill our role. Like, no. You're going to pick your role, and the chances that you're as good as the main role are low. That makes me want to put it in B. Because let's say you want to be an AoE DPS guy, you pick Spellmancer. But the chances you're going to be as good as Mage are low. And there's probably some other specs that are competing with you. Maybe Spellsword competes with the AoE DPS slot. Maybe one of the Rangers has good AoE. So, yeah, I'm actually putting Summoner at B tier in Zerg. And that is my final take. So this is pretty much fact at this point. So you guys can just look back at this tier list when you're playing Ashes during Alpha 2 and just know that this is where you're going to be in solo and small group and Zerg PvP. I'm just kidding, obviously. This is incredibly speculative, but it'll be fun to look back at. So thanks for watching. Peace.